What's up, Key Issues? Garrick here today, and I've got a pretty cool video for you guys. It's going to be a little bit of a conversation between myself and my guest here, Crisis.
What's up, everybody?
We are going to be talking about who the superior Spider-Man is out of the three Spider-Men from the live-action movie universes, that being the famous Raimi trilogy, the not as famous Amazing Spider-Man films, and of course the world-famous Marvel Cinematic Universe, that being Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man versus Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man versus Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Who would win in a no-holds-barred, just brutal Spider-Man death match taking place in, of course, New York City?
Yep, we're gonna look at just sort of objectively, you know, who's stronger, who's faster, who'd win in a fight, and then as well take a look at who's sort of the best Spider-Man pound for pound. Do they take more advantage of their intellect, of their webs, of their techniques, of their spider sense, and who
holds a train together the best, who can hold a ferry together the best. And I don't think Andrew ever does anything that cool with his webs.
Certainly in terms of keeping their relationships even alive, literally,
the best.
Garfield is clearly the worst.
Unfortunately for that guy. I mean, Tobey went ahead and saved Mary Jane multiple times. He went ahead and saved Gwen Stacy. You know, Tom hasn't had as many heroics with saving love interests. He kind of ruined one's life. And the other one, he saved her a couple times, so.
I guess we can start with the guy who started it all, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. So his AP and durability, there's a couple of key things. There's the pumpkin bombs, which can vaporize people, like a crowd of people, 6 people. That's calc to like small building.
Well, he turns them to skeletons first, and then they vaporize after that.
Right. I don't know what setting, I don't know what chemical process.
That's the spooky setting.
Yeah, Halloween spirit. He's got missiles, he's got bombs, he's got knives. I don't know what military application necessitates vaporizing you and then vaporizing your skeleton, but he's got it, and that's small building. I
feel like you take one of those bombs into the field of war, you're gonna get arrested for war crimes immediately.
Yeah, that's definitely breaking some pieces of the Geneva Convention. I don't think that's standard. Green Goblin is like, I probably couldn't even. He's saying to himself he's all but invincible. He doesn't really think he can stand up to Spider-Man outright after he gets like kicked through multiple walls and has all of his razor bats like pretty much dodged. So he like attacks Peter's, like the people he cares about, and then makes this big, just trying to crush his spirits. Green Goblin's tech probably wouldn't put down Spider-Man, most likely. And then we have Sandman, who's this big building-sized dude.
This is a big, sad guy.
Just a big, depressed, and he's doing it for his daughter. We've all been there, very relatable.
Of course.
He becomes this big sand monster. Spider-Man withstands multiple behind the head strikes from him before getting like momentarily knocked out. He's not even conked for that long. Harry pulls up and he's ready to fight Venom again. So there's that. So pretty consistently in that small building to building level, most consistently, I'd say.
Right. And we can talk about a little bit higher scaling that the character has that you've recently gotten some calculations for, which is pretty interesting. But if we take a look at Raimi Spider-Man versus like MCU Spider-Man, at a glance, of course, I think most people would say MCU Spider-Man is stronger just based on what we've seen. Visually, it looks more impressive, like holding the ferry together, stopping an attack from Cull Obsidian, who's out here ragdolling Iron Man, kicking Thanos in the face, etc., etc. But there are high outliers for the character, and then there are low outliers for the character. And he's pretty consistently within that building to large building range, just because he fights against Captain America, who is weaker than Winter Soldier's bionic arm at least. and Spider-Man just casually catches that and like tosses it away. Of course, Captain America, being a much more skilled combatant, was able to beat Spider-Man in that specific instance, but the Spider-Man we have from Far From Home, not really any stronger than the one we saw in Civil War, just has a lot more experience. I think he would absolutely destroy Captain America.
Up till that point, like, you have to consider that he's like 15 years old. He's probably never had to.
He's probably never fought anyone in his life.
Never fought. Yeah, he's stopping cars up to this point, and then you have him against the greatest soldier in history. It's not really fair. There's not many other ways. Yeah, no, there's not many other ways that fight could have gone.
So, unfortunate for him to lose that fight, but I think the character is pretty much confirmed to be stronger than Captain America at this point, especially based on how he was able to just completely embarrass Bucky, cocking that back and swinging it at him. So, the Cull Obsidian feat, I think, is just an outlier that can basically just be ignored, as it makes no sense within the context of the universe and what we've seen Spider-Man be able to accomplish up to this point. So I think he's pretty solidly, around that same level that Raimi Spider-Man is. So that makes those two going up against each other, at least at a glance, pretty interesting. And then when you take a look at Garfield Spider-Man, the Amazing Spider-Man, unfortunately for the guy, he's just not that impressive. He does have feats of him fighting and going back and forth against Lizard, who was also able to, tear apart a pressurized, sealed lab door that is supposed to, keep chemicals in and or out to keep people safe, which is pretty impressive. And then Lizard throws him through walls and stuff, but he's weaker than the Lizard is.
We see not only him, who is stronger than Spider-Man, but Spider-Man himself. They're both able to get pierced by bullets. Lizard had to regen from, a barrage of assault fire, and then Peter himself is kind of put down and kind of nearly crippled by a stray bullet to like the shin or something.
Yeah, and then you take a look at like Raimi Spider-Man, who we already talked about, tanking pumpkin bombs to the face, which turn people into skeletons, and then Ash after that. And then you have MCU Spider-Man, who literally is tanking like shotgun explosive rounds to the face from super advanced Stark tech that Mysterio's using, and just gets up right after that. Not to mention he's taken pummelings from sonic cannons that Mysterio had as well, and these were like causing significant damage to major city structures and things like that.
And probably shouldn't be too far off. Hulk gets stronger from Incredible Hulk is the most fodder version of Hulk, but even like, even just looking at it from the most like at a glance, these sonic cannons did hinder a version of the Hulk to some degree.
Right.
And then we have, Amazing Spider-Man getting shot by, New York City police officers. So you don't have to do much digging to see that there's a pretty big discrepancy between those two.
And at one point, the Amazing Spider-Man struggles to break through Rhino's windshield by punching it. So Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Tom's Spider-Man, I think, are pretty close to each other in terms of just like base stats. Unfortunately, the Amazing Spider-Man he's just not there. And if we want to take a look at even that Raimi scaling, that's a little bit higher tier, and then talk about like the Iron Spider suit, then the Amazing Spider-Man's just kind of not even in the conversation at all. Like, there would be no point to even mention it.
Essentially, you have this star that Doc Ock's created, and it clearly functions a little differently than like a star would. It's it's a sci-fi. You kind of just have to make a couple of concessions in terms of how it functions. But what we do see it do, it's pulling everything in the city, essentially, and Peter can, halt a wall being pulled with that much force, and then chuck it away from its like a desired, like the pull that the star is doing. He's able to overpower that to some degree, and that feat in and of itself is around, city block.
If we take a look at, the Iron Spider, because we're getting into more higher tier scaling, I think it's a little absurd to consider it. I mean, it is Iron Man level. Same nanites were used in both Iron Man's suit as well as Spider-Man's suit. You can conceivably say that he could cause that same sort of cut on Thanos that Iron Man did. Obviously, we've seen Spider-Man stagger Thanos, which would be far and away more impressive than anything the other two Spider-Men have. But if we want to put it in something a little bit easier to digest, if we take a look at the feat of Thor tanking the power from the neutron star, you can scale that somewhere around island to small country level, i.e. enough force to destroy a large island or destroy a small country. And that's about the attack potency that Thanos has. He punches Thor, he's able to make him bleed and bloody and bruise just like the Star was able to do. And then also Thanos is able to punch those nanite suits and sort of chip away at them.
An even stronger Thor. He's able to pummel and kind of no-diff an even stronger Thor in Endgame without any stones. So, that's definitely within his realm of power to output energy around that star.
And the most powerful version of Thor, as stated by the Russos, the directors of the film themselves, is the Endgame version. And that guy bats Mjolnir using Stormbreaker at Thanos, who uses Iron Man in a nanite suit as a shield, and the suit just sort of takes the entire brunt of that force. So using that scaling, it's kind of not fair for the MCU Spider-Man. I mean, he came into a universe that already had like gods in it, so it's a little unfair to the other two Spider-Men. So taking that away and ignoring that and using the high tier scaling for Raimi, then you say, sure, Raimi wins in the durability and attack potency categories against the other two Spider-Men, but give Iron Spider to the MCU version, and then it's sort of a wash for the other two.
Yeah, Amazing Spider-Man, he's solidly at the bottom. There's no real avenue for him to even secure a victory. I mean, Electro is stated stronger than him anyway, and he has some like kind of hype statements about like, oh, he's got all the power in New York City.
But we don't know, can he expend all of that energy at once? Obviously not, because the character still needs energy, stored within him to do other actions. So it would be completely ridiculous to say that any of the lightning attacks that Spider-Man was hit by in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 were the full power that Electro could output, because obviously that's all the power that he had absorbed, and from that point he would be expelling it and it would be, gone.
He, as far as we know, he is the energy he has. So if he's using it all up, he'd be gone. Like, he wouldn't exist anymore. He'd either be reduced to like, how he was when he became Electro, which is he'd be like starving, which we never see him in that state in the final fight. So yeah, there's not even anything to really say he'd be using that full power against Andrew.
Right. So now that we talked about the attack potency and durability pretty thoroughly, we can get into speed a little bit. And I'll just say right off the bat, it's another situation where two of the Spider-Men are in the conversation and the other one's sort of left out. So if you take a look at the MCU, I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've seen my other Marvel Cinematic Universe scaling videos. We scale all of them off of Captain Marvel and Thanos. Pretty much every single character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that has any significance to the power scale at all, which of course Spider-Man does, scales to Captain Marvel and Thanos. Captain Marvel is massively hypersonic, moving at speeds over 750,000 miles per hour. And then the Amazing Spider-Man just blatantly dodges electricity throughout his entire second film. And at one point he's moving at regular speed while the electricity is seen moving in slow motion. So you can argue that he's even faster than that. But electricity typically moves from 50% to the speed of light. So it's pretty impressive for the Amazing Spider-Man to move that quickly.
Unfortunate reality of at least the mainline Raimi movies. He just wasn't lucky enough to get Electro in his series. He just deals with, people who are firing bullets at him, or, maybe people who scale to rockets and things like that. If you look at that, you get Tobey around high hypersonic, based on Doc Ock reacting to the they're not solar flares, they're solar prominences that are being fired from his star. We see his arms like containing them. That's the whole plot point. How Rosie gets killed is he fails to keep up with all of the emerging prominences. So obviously Spider-Man scales to Doc Ock. So you have, high hypersonic and massively hypersonic, and obviously the high hypersonic, there's no other feats within the main Raimi movies that are anywhere near that. So, and even if that's the case, even if you want to get him to high hypersonic, if you want to use that, that's still a whole tier. High hypersonic and massively hypersonic, there's at least like a 10 times difference. So either of the other two Spider-Men would be able to they'd be able to hit him 10 times before he'd be able to react, essentially, like at a low end.
And then at that point, you're taking a look at, okay, speed, durability, attack potency, put all of it together, what's gonna happen? I think 10 times out of 10, you're gonna end up with the Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man finding a way to win. Even if you do use the higher tier power scaling for Tobey Maguire's character and use like the building level for the Marvel Cinematic Universe character, he has such a speed advantage that he would eventually figure out a way to win.
It would be like in The Flash, where he's so fast that he can just sort of stop time and figure out how to defuse a bomb before it goes off. It would be like that. It would be, Tom is super smart. He'd eventually realize, okay, maybe I can use my electric webbing, and he just wouldn't be able to get tagged. Is the problem. There'd be no pressure on Tom from Tobey in terms of a speed perspective, that Tom would eventually just, he's got, even without the Iron Spider, I think he said there's like hundreds of different web combinations, and then there's also instant kill in his, base, presumably in his Far From Home suit, as well as, as we see in his Homecoming suit and Iron Spider suit, seems to just be a standard function. So
we have no friggin' clue what that does. So
who knows?
That could do any number of things to kill someone. He could have poisons in that suit. I mean, we don't want to get into speculation,
Sure.
But he'd eventually figure out a way to win, even if he did have to break his code and end up killing the other Spider-Man.
If it's between him and his life, as far as we've seen, he will kill at least, the Outriders, which arguably are sentient, whatever, but he will definitely draw that line if he's pressured enough, it seems.
At the end of the day, he just webs up all breathing orifices for Tobey's Spider-Man. He f***ing suffocates. Like, he'd eventually figure out a way to win. And then Andrew's Spider-Man, of course, is much faster than the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, so he'd be slinging around, maybe dodging some attacks. Eventually, he would go to hit somebody, or somebody would hit him, and he would just fold like a cheap cat, essentially. Yeah. He'd get twisted up like a pretzel, and it would be over.
He pulled up to Tobey might not know what happened. He might have been too fast, but, he'll blink and he'll see Andrew on the ground.
It'd be like a bug hitting a windshield.
Yeah.
Like, think of the scene from The Boys where Huey's first girlfriend gets killed. Yeah. That's what would happen.
And Tobey would be like, what happened? There was a Spider-Man here a second ago.
Splattered in blood. But yeah, he doesn't have any chance. Yeah. So from this point, I think what would be most interesting would be to talk about, okay, forget stats, forget that these characters are all in separate universes, because obviously they're all going to show up in No Way Home, and they're all going to be relative to each other despite the scaling from the previous films, right?
It's just the superhero tradition. Watch Avengers 1, Iron Man, Thor, and Cap are all at each other's throats the first time they meet. There's a whole movie about them all fighting. Whenever superheroes get together and they never met before, we gotta see them fight. So yeah, we're gonna see, they're all gonna be relative to each other. Not to mention that the villains from the prior movies are going to fight Tom Holland, and so they're certainly not just gonna get stomped. There has to be a movie there. So no matter how you look at it, what's most likely going to happen is they're all just going to end up being relative.
And you had that situation with Black Widow and Hawkeye moving massively hypersonic 750,000 miles per hour reaction times just because they have to move that fast for the universe to make any sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, of course the writers are taking all of that into account the best they can. It's a concession you have to make.
Oh, well, yeah. These jewels there's not a relative amount of jewels present between these two characters. You know, that's just not, stories we wouldn't get this movie, you know.
Right, and as people who like to take a look at how powerful various characters are from different universes, of course, we don't have any problem with the characters just showing up and now all of a sudden being relative to each other without any explanation at all, just because we're more interested in a cool story than we are exactly perfect power scaling. Like, at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So all these characters are going to be relative. Prior to seeing them together in the movie all fighting, because that's going to be completely different, how do these characters stack up against each other? You have Tobey's Spider-Man, who's been far more active for far longer than the other two. We have Andrew's Spider-Man, who has gone through 2 adventures and one dead girlfriend, and we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man, who started out by himself, making his own web shooters, making his own web fluid, getting recruited by Iron Man, receiving a suit that is way beyond anything he could ever imagine, and then receiving another suit that's even crazier than that one, fighting a literal god Thanos with reality warping powers, and then going back to fighting a guy with some VR. So I think Tobey's Spider-Man and Tom Holland's Spider-Man are probably the closest to each other in terms of experience, just because obviously they've had more films to work within. And honestly,
I would say Andrew might be the more emotionally experienced.
You know, I think taking a look at these 3, I think Tobey has a lot of advantages going into this just based on the versatility of opponents that he's gone up against, because he's gone up against Goblin, who has all this advanced tech. He's gone up against a Doc Ock with these arms that are able to move autonomously, and he has to figure it out. He's gone up against Venom, a alien symbiote plus Sandman simultaneously, and another Goblin in his 3rd movie.
Which, now that I think about it, Tobey has a distinct advantage in terms of experience, because he's actually fought somebody with his exact same powers but stronger. You know, he fought against Venom, who had all of his memories, had all of his abilities, and he was still able to, you know, combat him and eventually, you know, get the win, which is pretty relevant to the fight in hand, and something that neither Tom nor Andrew has had to
right,
deal with.
And that's a great point to bring up with the whole beating Venom, because he had to think of a unique way to defeat an opponent that was much stronger than him. So the ability to think on his feet, I think Tobey is great at that. But I also think the other 2 Spider-Man are not so bad. I mean, Andrew does get a little bit of help with Captain Stacy, kind of nudging him toward the solution in the first movie with getting the, you know, nitrogen to freeze a lizard and then taking him down in that way. And then in the second movie, I mean, he didn't realize that maybe he should insulate his suit until he was told to do so, and then had to Google how batteries worked, which isn't that great. And, you know,
yeah, they tried to make him more, you know, relatable. I mean, even in the creative process of the movie, they tried to remove him less so from the, like, you know, nerd archetype that arguably the other 2 kind of fall into. They decided to make him less of like a geek, but more so just an outsider, and so within that you sacrifice that level of uber brilliance. He's like hearing in on like the actual nerds on, you know, how he would go about designing web shooters, as opposed to Tom. Tom just developed the technology seemingly just out of thin air, just thought it up.
He built it himself
from scratch.
He made it out of materials. Who knows where the hell he got it? And he's making his own web fluid.
He's
making his own web fluid in chemistry class using like spare chemicals that you can get in a high school chemistry lab. So that's absolutely insane in terms of like an intelligence feat. You know, he's able to escape that high security facility using like a calculator, and then of course he does a lot of very intelligent things as far as adapting to his opponents, especially in Far From Home, where he's able to build a bomb on the fly, and he's able to, you know, using his spider sense, finally outwit Mysterio. And if we want to talk about spider sense, I think all three of the characters are pretty relative in terms of that, although I think the MCU Spider-Man has the best just showcase of spider sense. What do you think?
Tobey has an advantage in the sense that, like we see when Flash pulls up on him with the punch, just the first time having his spider sense activated, he takes in the whole room on such a micro and macro level. He sees a spitball flying. He sees a fly, like so detailed he can see the wings of it. You know, this is how it's conveyed to the audience, and it's all in this like small fragment of time. He's able to get a snapshot of his environment in 3D almost completely. So in terms of, you know, maybe if it's if Holland is getting jumped by the other two, he'd probably have an advantage in the sense that his spider sense has dealt with more things coming at him at a given time. But I think Tobey more so holistically, his battlefield awareness would generally be much higher, you know, via his spider sense, and much more detailed, in my opinion. Andrew, they don't really showcase his spider sense. I think would you argue maybe the scene with Electro where he's on the stairs
I was gonna bring
is
that
sort
up.
of,
I think that's probably his best sort of showcase of his spider sense, where he's able to take in the environment and sort of slow things down in his own head, like internally, and figure out a solution, or figure out who needs saved, what are the priorities, and then going about doing those things in the proper order. So I think that's the best showcase that he's had. And like I said at the beginning, I think all three of these characters are pretty relative in terms of how their spider sense functions and how they're able to use it pretty effectively. All three characters, of course, they're not gods, you know, they do get hit, they do get tagged eventually, but I think they're all pretty high tier in sort of the spider sense realm. Now, if we take a look at equipment, you know, it's not really close for the other two Spider-Men that aren't Tom Holland Spider-Man. Of course, he's got the Iron Man tag.
They're in their PJs. He's wearing Iron Man hand-me-downs. There's a disadvantage.
So he has not only all these various web combinations, from bombs to like high-impact web grenades, which of course Tobey can just make out of his own natural web fluid. We've never seen Andrew do anything like that, but he has been able to like split his webs into like a wide arc by putting his thumb over his web shooter, which is pretty cool. But of course, Tom is he's got everything you could ever want. He's got the taser webs, he's got instant kill mode, not to mention he's got his own AI that can help him figure out situations on the fly, and it is an Iron Man created AI, so I would imagine that it would have the ability to scan and dissect fighting styles, so maybe he could use that to his advantage to sort of figure out Tobey or Andrew if he's having trouble kind of reading them, because all three Spider-Men, it's Spider-Man's sort of thing to be a fluid, unpredictable, acrobatic combatant. So being like that, moving so inconsistently and all over the place, I think would be hard for any of the others to read. So maybe that could give Tom an advantage in an equal stat scenario. So taking a look at it holistically, I think I would be rooting for the Raimi Spider-Man to win. I'm not gonna act like I'm not a little bit biased. Those are my favorite Spider-Man movies, but being realistic about everything, I think most of the time, even if you just want to say 6 times out of 10, I think the MCU Spider-Man is gonna end up on top, just because he has an overwhelming advantage with his suit. And I'd say he's relative to Tobey's Spider-Man in terms of experience. Probably not on the same level, but his overwhelming advantages with the suit just make it so unfair. if you want to take him out of the suit,
Yeah.
put him in his homecoming suit, everyone's in their own homemade suit, then I think Tobey probably gets the W. And then, Andrew in this case gets a lot more shine. He does do a lot more, but I think being less experienced and receiving so much help from other people outside of himself in almost every single fight makes it a little hard for me to say, yeah, this character is going to come up with a way to win, especially with him being not as savvy in a combat sense, being able to figure out how to beat his opponents on his own, or just being as intelligent. I think the other two are just way smarter in terms of like book smarts and way smarter on the battlefield.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think going from least effective fighter to most effective, it's honestly Andrew at the bottom. Like you said, he gets help in nearly every single one of his fights against his supervillains, and he uses his abilities in less creative ways than the other two, in less effective ways in a combat scenario. Whereas Tobey does have, various ways of using his webs. Like you said, he fires web bullets in Spider-Man 3. He makes a tripwire, and he does explore creative ways to defeat his villains and uses the environment against many of his adversaries. Doc Ock, he takes advantage of the cables on the ground, gets him to stab through it. Venom obviously is able to use sound waves. Against Sandman, he uses the water in the sewer. So he definitely has more of that sort of combat intelligence. And then for any bit of raw combat skill, combat intelligence, intuition that Tom might have, he can literally just say something and it'll happen. He can just say, hey, I want to shock this guy, or hey, I want to throw a bomb at this guy, or, any number of thing. He just has such a raw advantage in terms of the variety of attack he can use. And it's just a matter of time. It's Stark Tech, it's Iron Man we're talking about. He has nearly inexhaustible options here. And it's just a matter of time before one of those catches Tobey lacking. You have Vulture, who Spider-Man in Homecoming is able to ultimately... He doesn't even really beat him, honestly. Vulture beats himself. His wings are just, distraught and destroyed from the battle. And he kind of just, Spider-Man is ultimately defeated in that fight. Green Goblin, I think, is more of a varied opponent in the air or on the ground than the Vulture. Spider-Man is able to beat him at multiple points. He's able to attack his glider. He beats him in the burning building, essentially kicks him aside, and then he ultimately defeats him in the... What is that? What would you even call that place? In that derelict building. And then, I keep stressing it, Venom with the same memories as Spider-Man. But again, it's just, the fact of the matter is Tom has a nearly inexhaustible arsenal in any of his armors outside from his literal pajamas. He's going to pick something or find something to pretty securely grant him the dub.
Yeah, and I think Tom does pretty well against his foes for the most part. Vulture being the one example where maybe he didn't do as well, but he did end up coming up with a plan to beat or to eventually kill Ebony Maw. He did go up against Mysterio and beat him one-on-one.
That's true.
Using very, very limited amounts of, Stark Tech. It wasn't like he was in his Iron Spider suit or anything like that. And I do have to hand it to Andrew. We've been a little tough on him, but he does come up with interesting ways to possibly beat his villains. He sets a spider web trap for Lizard down in the sewer. He does end up losing that fight and pretty stupidly leaves his camera there with his full name Peter Parker on it for the Lizard to find later.
Yeah.
But he tries. He does try. Alright, so that's all we've got to say about these 3 Spider-Men. We've been here a decent amount of time, and I think we've gotten out everything that we could possibly mention about all 3 of these Spider-Man, who would win in a fight, who's the most effective Spider-Man, and I think we came up with a pretty solid answer to both of those questions and a pretty good consensus. Let us know down in the comments who you think would win in a fight, and let's try to keep it as civil as possible. Also, be sure to leave a comment down below letting us know what you're most excited to see in Spider-Man No Way Home. Thanks to Crisis for joining me on this video. It was a lot of fun. Be sure to check out his channel where he has a video on the Sam Raimi trilogy, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, talking all about how powerful that character is, from strength, durability, speed, as well as all of his other unique abilities. So that's it for us. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and remember the motto, it's Spider-Man over everything, and I'll see you guys next time.